so they're just watching me dance?
Yeah.
No, not now.
Oh,
Now they are.
Okay, good. That's
Now
good.
they
That's
are.
good.
All right. Now you should do that. Hello out there, guys.
Hello.
Hope you guys are all well. We're glad that you carved out some time for us, and we really actually like these tastings because it allows us to reach across the country and talk to some old friends of ours. We've got some really cool people that we've been talking to for a long time, and then some new folks too. So for those of you who are joining us for the first time, thank you very much for hanging out with us for a bit of time.
I forgot we did HG3.5 bottles. Is that bad?
No.
I totally look at them like, that's half bottle.
I don't know who's gonna
who's
gonna use them. But
I know,
yeah.
but
No, it's good. Yeah, it's for us. So we're working primarily today on the 2013s and the cab kind of section of our being, which is the core of how we built our reputation. And so we're kind of excited to jump into these. And so we're gonna chat a little bit about the 13 vintage, and then we'll taste through the flight of wines with you guys, and then hopefully solicit all of your commentary, and we can get into more of a direct live program. I don't, unless it's desired, I don't know that I'll go into too much background on Hourglass. Most of you who are with us today have probably heard our pitch and our story ad nauseum. So, but if there's anybody who wants to ask questions about where we came from and what we're trying to do, please do. We'll take those sort of as they come in. Tony, do you want to talk a little bit about the 2013 vintage? And
yeah, sure. Great vintage. I know I always joke that, when you go to a wine college, whether it be Fresno State or Davis or Cal Poly, there's a class at the end that's always marketing that says, every vintage is a great vintage. But unfortunately, meet a winemaker every year is great. But the reality of it is 2013, for me, since I've been working in Napa Valley in 1993, is the best vintage I've seen. Tons of tannin, tons of color, tons of everything. It really is about managing the tannins of the vintage, but you're going to start hearing the drumbeat in the next couple of months that this is truly a special, one-of-a-kind vintage. And I think these wines really show that.
And you guys are probably way ahead of the curve than we are in terms of tasting 2013. So
yeah,
we'd love to get your perspective as well on what you're seeing from the wines that you're tasting from the 13 vintage. But as a whole,
yeah, it's a great vintage.
Really strong. We've had this sequence of vintages, 2012, 13, 14, which are all really, really strong vintages.
And even 15, some highs are as high. There's some peaks and valleys because of the vintage was very unique.
Tony, what are your thoughts about the sequence of vintages, 2013, 14, and 15, relative to the drought?
Again,
is there a correlation?
Everybody. It's funny. We talk about water, right? Those have been the big questions showing on the road. Oh my God, the drought. Are you guys affected by it? Grapevines in general have the least amount of needs of water than any other crop.
Very drought tolerant.
And we were already on a crusade, I think, in Napa Valley. Napa Valley is on the forefront of a lot of different, farming techniques and so forth, especially deficit irrigation. So we irrigate just enough to keep the vines alive through the harvest time. And in the 80s, the big thing was don't water after veraison, and so the vine would almost die while the grapes were ripening, and so that sort of gave way to some riper flavors and the raisoning and sort of the higher alcohol wines that people tend to rally against. But now we realize that you don't need to get that right to get what we're looking for. So we didn't, I think 14 we irrigated twice, 15 we irrigated twice, 12 we irrigated once.
And we have incredibly well-drained sites.
Yeah,
so the Hourglass Estate site and the Blueline Estate site are the two estates that we have to work with. The Hourglass Estate is fractured bedrock. It's a soil profile called hambrite. It's really, really intense, incredibly well-drained soils there. And then Blueline is an old riverbed. It's an upturned riverbed. We named it after these two Blueline streams that channel through the property, and they have for thousands of years meandered back and forth and created this upturned riverbed. So there we have these gravel, cobble, high mineral concentration, low organic carbon, so incredible drainage there. And one of the things that I think about relative to drought is if you go back to the last time that we had a really intense drought cycle like this, would be the mid-70s.
Yep,
76, and you look at those mid-70s. In fact, I just had a bottle of 1974 Ridge Montebello on Saturday night. truly.
No one likes a braggart, Jeff.
Well, you
No one
know,
wants
I
a
mean,
braggart,
I
so.
think these guys would appreciate
Okay,
that.
so that's
Maybe I can get away with it here.
Okay. All right.
But I mean, it was truly one of the most mind-blowing wines I've ever had, and it reminded me of those mid-70s Napa Cabs and how great they are. And I was thinking about, you know, obviously our winemaking techniques have evolved somewhat, or quite a bit, since the mid-70s. But the conditions remind me of those mid-70s.
Exactly the same.
Yeah.
You know, it is. And I think it's the way we make wines now are different. I mean, back then you had a bush for a vine, and now we have much more vertical shoot positioning,
Mm-hmm.
so the crop is exposed a little bit more. But those wines' longevity, I think, are tied to the drought.
Yeah.
You know, and these wines are tannic young, lots of tannin. I mean, when it gets hot, grapes develop more tannin. So, and it also develop more color. So it's both good and bad. So I think.
And also think about this, that a lot of the berry sizing is done in the springtime conditions. So if you have water deficits in the spring and early summer, you tend to have smaller berries. So you're going to get higher concentration because you're going to have more skin to pulp ratios
And juice, yeah.
and juice ratios. So you're going to have deeper extractions, you get more complexity, and again, more tannin, and hopefully, if you're wise, you've gotten a lot of color to go along with that
and
tannin.
match it. So, I mean, again, I think, you know, for the vintages, I think they're great wines. You know, if you look at 12, 13, and 14, I would put 13 first. I actually like 14 more than 12. Some people like their 12s more. 12s are very pliant, very rich, very forward. I like the 13s. I think the 13s just have more. And then I like 14 for Hourglass, and then 12. And then 15, the highs are extremely high. But I don't know if uniformity through all, you know, through our site, through all the varietals, through our estate vineyard,
More variability.
a little more variability
block to
because
block.
it was the hottest vintage that we've seen in
Yeah.
Napa Valley. 15 was an
Yeah.
incredibly hot vintage, incredibly early vintage, incredibly small crop. So, but I think the wines are great. I mean, if you kept your eye on the ball, you still make great wines. So
join us again next year,
Yeah,
the year
see you
after,
later.
and we'll taste those.
yeah.
All right, so shall we dive in? The first wine in the flight is the HG3.
What's this one? Right, this one?
It's
Okay.
that inner wine. So 2013 HG3.
Hi.
Hi, it's the one on the left.
Oh, that was this one. Okay, no wonder it didn't smell like that. Okay, good.
Oh, you're going left to right, not inside.
So yeah, no, I was wondering why the one on the right smelled like the Hourglass Estate. I'm also amazed. All right, you guys
Well,
get
and you know
along
what? That's
very
actually
well.
cool because Hourglass Estate is unmistakable.
So, yeah,
So
so that's interesting. So,
no.
so HG3, you know, it's predominantly a declassified younger block from our property. But it's funny, Jeff and I, you know, in 13 decided to do a crazy old trick from Bordeaux and Hermitage the wine. We actually added a little bit of Syrah and Petite Syrah to the wine to give a little more density and richness, a little more color. Something different. It worked really well. I sort of tabled the idea to Jeff and said, let's try some blends, and it worked incredibly well. So we're going to keep doing that in the future. Every year is going to be a different blend, I think, on that. But I think it really adds some density and some richness and some chocolatey notes and some really, I hate to use the word, but unctuous. I mean, I would be kicked out of Wine Lab at Davis if I said that. Anna will be mad at me, but unctuous is a word I like to use. So
It's a very dense, rich wine. So this is kind of fun. This is very interesting process change for us. As many of you know, we'd worked with Bob Foley for 15 years before working with Tony, and we brought Tony in with the 2012 vintage to take over winemaking. And so there were, of course, as you would expect, some protocol changes as different winemakers have different approaches. And one of the things that Tony really likes doing is blending much earlier in the cycle. Is that more of a traditional Bordelais?
yeah, Bordeaux. I mean, you get the first blend put together by about before en premiere, and so you do it in February or March. You put the main body of wine together. I think what we suffer from in Napa Valley a bit at times is Burgundyitis. You know, we're going to keep all of our little single blocks separate, and then we're going to slam them together at the end. And in Burgundy, you keep your Romani, Saint Vivant separate from your Richebourg. But what Jeff and I discussed over many glasses of wine is the fact that we're making Blueline. That's our estate wine, and that's got to be the best. We can't keep all these parts separate. I want to make it like stew. Stew doesn't taste good the night you make it. Stew tastes good 2 or 3 days later. So we marry it earlier, so the longer it can marry, the more the wine becomes whole, in my mind. And it works well with Bordeaux and Bordeaux varietals. So
I think it's also interesting because I think it takes wood differently.
It does.
It affects the aging or the élevage process a little bit.
It does. I think the wood marries better. I mean, I think the wood, you know, we've increased the use of new wood here, but I don't find these wines, obtusely woody. I mean, that's why I had to sort of get you to buy in on that at first, because you do taste wine out of barrel young, like, oh my God, it's so oaky.
Yeah.
But over time, it really melds into the wine, and it becomes part of the wine. We do ML and barrel, and part of the reason we do ML and barrel is to get rid of all that young sort of woodiness, and what it does is it binds to the bacteria and the yeast, and it falls out. So you tend to get just kissed by the wood, not sort of dominated by the wood.
Yeah, it was an interesting learning process for me to go through, because I had been accustomed to a very different regime where we would blend, keep everything separate and then blend right before bottling. And it was a little, the learning curve for me was a little steep, because when we first tried this out, the oak regimes were incredibly overt when the wines were young. And I was a little panicked, to be honest with you, like, oh my God, these wines are going to be really, really strongly oaked, and we're going to lose the personality of the vineyards. And when you have vineyards that have really strong personalities, obviously you want that to kind of shine through and have the oak really more as an accent rather than as a driving element. And so the first time, after we get the primary blends done after malolactic fermentation, a couple months in, and I'm tasting these wines with Tony, I'm like, oh my God, wow, there's the wood signature is so high on this. And then to watch that integrate through to the time that we bottled was the most amazing transformation for me, to see how structure and wood work together over time in a really cool way. And now the wood influences are just that. They're just a little teeny...
it's part of the greater sum. The sum's greater than its parts, so... Yeah. And, I'm a believer in new wood on wines. I think sometimes it can be overdone. And, but we tend to use different wood percentages for every wine. It's not one size fits all. It's not everything's 100% new oak. We tend to look at the wines, Jeff and I tend to look at, like the Blueline is about 75 to 80. The Hourglass tends to be 90 to 95. Hourglass is 25-year-old sea clone. It can eat, or 23-year-old sea clone. It can eat the wood.
Well, the structure of that one, the tannin structure, the color structure dictates a lot of the decisions that Tony will make. And this is something he's taught me along the way. You can't just have a prescription that you just meter out to all of the wines. You actually have to taste the wines, evaluate the wines, and then look at them from a chemical standpoint to understand what the structural integrity of those wines is. And the more structure there is, the more wood they can take. Mm-hmm. The less structure, the less wood. And so I shouldn't say we, Tony, really kind of dials in and tries to address each lot very specifically in each vintage.
Yeah, I mean, Blueline, is 5 varietals. We have all the major 5 Bordeaux varietals. I know you guys will throw Carmenere at me. Somebody out there will. That'll look really bad. But, the 5 main ones, and hey, we're going to maybe even look at planting Carmenere later. But then Hourglass is one clone of Cabernet, one rootstock. So very different wines, so we oak them differently.
So the HD3 then, we have, when we acquired the Blueline estate in 2006, one of the first things we did was pull out big sections of the vineyard and replant. So we've got some newer plantings along the way. Some of those wines structurally just didn't have the stuffing to be able to make the estate wine program. And yet they were still really good quality wines.
Yeah.
And so the HG3 program kind of evolved out of Tony's winemaking style. So we're blending earlier. We're being maybe a little bit more rigid in terms of the selection process of what wines are making it into the blends. And a lot of those new plantings now are starting to come online. So we have more pieces of the puzzle to be able to play with. Some work better with others. Some don't work as well. So at the tail end now, we've got a few high quality wines that didn't really make the final blend for whatever reason, and so that becomes the core of HG3. And I think that, Tony, would you say that maybe structure is the defining element of what makes it into the estate wines versus what makes it into HG3 as a second label?
That's a good question. It's hard. I mean, again, you have to sort of taste it. I can taste it.
When you taste it.
When you taste it. That's a sort of a cop out. But in reality, I think it just has a little more density to the estate wines. It has a little more completeness. It sort of grabs your attention a little bit more. I know the Merlot lot, that's the backbone of this. It's a beautiful lot of Merlot. It just isn't at the level of the estate. I know, you guys are saying, well, why? It's a little more simple. And I think all of you out there, have tasted a lot of wine, so you understand what I mean by that, And so I just don't think it carries Hourglass Blueline Merlot pedigree. So we discussed in putting it here. So that's why it's there. So
Cool. Do we have any questions from the group about HG3?
So far, there's been praise of your sweater, first of all.
Fred Perry.
That's what the guy said. I saw it over there. I'm like, wow, okay. What about my Carhartt sweater? Come on. Working man clothes. So.
And that was from Isaac Baker, who's also asking about the blend and just sort of what inspired it, kind of recapping what it is, and yeah.
So Isaac Baker was asking about what inspired the blend. I think we covered that maybe a little bit, but if there are more specific questions.
I think the Petite Syrah, there's a lot of people out there why Petite Syrah, why Syrah. You know, when I started my career, I was at Duckhorn, and I was able to be involved with the Paradox project. That was my first project as a winemaker, and I got to take that over when the changes happened. And I fell in love with Petite Syrah and Syrah a long time ago. And so when I floated the idea to Jeff loves Petite Syrah. I mean, everybody loves Petite Syrah and Syrah. I mean, they do. I mean, you can't sell it.
Except for the market.
Except for the market, yeah. But boy, it tastes good. So
everybody in the insider market loves it. Everybody out there is like, what the hell is this?
You know, Petite Syrah adds just a wonderful density and plumminess and richness to any type of wine. It's almost secret sauce in a way. It sounds funny, but it works really well in this blend. Right away we did it, and we were blown away by it. So
Petite Syrah is an interesting grape in that you can gain density and richness from it, but it also will hold its acid late into the season in hotter climates.
And it has a ton of color.
And it's got a ton of color, so it becomes this incredible sort of fixer grape. You know,
it really is. And
percentage points.
Zinfandel great. I mean, you know, the best Zinfandels I think are the ones that have Petite Syrah in them. You know, or I can always say Carignan, but it's Carignan, however you want to say it.
A couple percentage points of Petite Syrah will smooth over or brighten up or do a lot of things to a blend.
Yeah. So.
And then a comment from Dezel. He's saying that it's slightly darker, the 2013 than the 2012, with regards to the fruit profile, but well-defined, good energy and freshness.
Great.
Yeah, it's a Petite Syrah.
So the question is, or the comment to the rest of you out there is that the 13 is a little darker, a little denser than the 2012, which is very true. And that part of that is a vintage thing. 2012, to me, was a little bit more of a red fruit vintage, a little tangier, maybe a little brighter acidity, not as quite heavy dark black fruits. 2013 vintage was all about black fruits.
It is, yeah.
And so part of that's a vintage thing, but I think the Petite Syrah, again, is part of what gives it a little more
plum sauce. It's like hoisin. I mean, it really, truly is. And you'd be amazed on some of the wines out there. I mean, you know, a lot of the Dave Finney wines. He's a big believer in Petite Syrah in a lot of his different wines. Yeah. So, you know, it's
the first vintage of Prisoner was predominantly
Petite Syrah. Yeah. And again, I can believe that. And when I worked with Petite Syrah at Paradox, it was amazing stuff. And we're a Dry Creek vineyard, we always wanted to play with, you know, so.
Cool, and people are digging the Merlot too. They're saying that it kind of adds its soft, mouthfeel. A question from Fred Swan.
Okay.
Do the toast profiles and coopers for the barrels on the three wines?
Yeah, they do.
Well, hold on. Let's do this. Let's reiterate the question so everybody.
Sorry. So the question out there was, does the different oak profile, do they differ? And they do. Jeff and I are very, you know, like I was saying earlier,
really different.
We look at each wine individually and try to match the cooper with the wine and the vintage, so to speak. So Hourglass HD3 is about 50% new wood. Tends to be more of a medium plus toast house. The Blueline Cabernet, which will be the second wine you're trying tonight. That's more medium plus to a little bit of heavy toast in there.
75% new.
75% new. Taranceau, Sylvain, a little Nadalier, a little Seguin, but it's probably Taranceau and Sylvain. And then on the Hourglass Estate is Darnajou and Taranceau and Sylvain. So.
This became so to Fred, to answer your question about the personality of the barrels, it's really markedly different. So if you take a Taranceau barrel, a Sylvain barrel, and a Darnajou barrel, for example, you're going to get very, very different characteristics. It's going to have a different effect on the mouthfeel, and it's going to have a very different effect on aromatic profiles. And this became a little bit of an internal debate between Tony and I. I have not been as huge a fan of the Darnajou barrels because they are very, very dramatic. And Tony likes them quite a bit in very specific places.
Yeah, I tend not to use them 100%, and I always tend to use them as a blend. So, you know, what I've found, and again, I go back to Bordeaux, is at every major house, it's a blend of cooperages for each wine. It's not one cooperage, one wine. Pinot Noir, again, tend to get more like 100% the Williams Sauvignon, 100% Francois, or Helen Turley, 100% Francois. And for me, I like using a blend. Now, there's some main drivers of those cooperages. Sylvain, small family-owned cooperage, right out of town, right in Libourne, which is right out of town, right out of Pomerol. Taranceau, Cognac barrel, Left Bank barrel, through and through. And then Darnajou, which is a smaller producer from Pomerol. And so made famous by Schrader, and actually the person who really made Darnajou famous is Pingus. They were 100% Darnajou. So they are very dramatic, but I tend to blend them and use them as a spice. Not a mouthful of pepper is not very good.
Well,
but
yeah,
I think that it's better.
And you know what's interesting? That was the learning curve for me. Is that this goes back to something that Tony was talking about early on, about how structure is a really important deciding factor in terms of how you're going to marry up what wood you use with it. So a barrel like Darnajou, we wouldn't use it on wines that don't have the structure to be able to take that kind of wood.
Yeah.
And we used it on Hourglass Estate. And I'll tell you, after the first 3 months of this barrel, I was really concerned because it was so woody and so smoky. And I thought, wow, that's going to change the characteristic of the vineyard. And sure enough, over the course of the 22 months of aging, or however long it was that year, it was amazing that was the only aromatic profile you had. And then over time, it became this very whispered little nuance. And the personality of the vineyard was able to show through. And Tony was like, that's because the structure of that vineyard is going to trump pretty much anything. It's true.
I mean, again, I love new wood. I think great wine needs, especially massive wines, need new wood. I don't want it to be overtly oaky though. That's just a kiss of death. I want you to be able to have it impart sort of an aromatic, and it hits you and then it goes away and you start getting more, rote tar or black cherry, black olive, and so barrels are interesting. I mean, I saw right here something last week. We have multi-year contracts on the barrels. Amy said that. We have, I have a relationship, and Jeff has a relationship with our cooperages year after year after year, and it is a relationship business. If you buy them this year, you get them next year. And so we do have that relationship, but it's not a multi-year contract, no. Sometimes barrels are really much, it's a natural product, and if you ever have an opportunity out there to watch barrels be built, it is one of the most fascinating, interesting things you'll ever see. It is a dying craft. It is, these people are artisans, and it's all done by hand. They're master coopers, and as you can imagine, people don't really want to get into the business of smashing their fingers every day, so they're expensive. It's like a piece of furniture. People don't understand that a barrel is $1,000, so
or more.
And it's old growth wood. So the French have done a great job of metering, how many trees are taken every year, and then they plant more. But if you get a year where the huge storm comes through and knocks a bunch, I want to say it was 99 when they had the huge storm that knocked down a third of the trees in France or something drastic like that. Barrels went up in price and were very hard to get. They're more expensive. So.
Before we move on to, can you reconfirm the percentage of Petite Syrah and HD3?
It has Petite Syrah. So
somewhere in
off
there.
the top of my head, we can figure it out. I'm sorry. We'll go grab a sheet in a second.
You do the blend, and then you ever look at it again.
Exactly. We're working on the 14 right now. So then the 15, we're marrying the 15 next week. We can find out in a sec.
5 to 10%, somewhere in that.
Oh, I think it. I looked at it this morning. God, what is it? I want to say it's about 8 to 10%.
Yeah.
No, it's 10%. I think it's 10%.
Okay.
We'll find out for you in a second. We have a text sheet over there. So the little the elves that are helping us with this will figure it out for us. So,
or you can just make it up.
Yeah, let's make it up. That's 134%. Yeah.
Funny math.
Sorry, that's funny math.
That's funny
Fuzzy math. So.
Shall we move on to Blueline Cabernet?
Sure.
And start taking your questions on Blueline Cab. Actually, Tony, do you want any commentary that you would have on?
When Jeff and I started talking about me coming to work for him, this is the property that sort of sold me on coming to work for him. Hourglass Estate had already been sort of established as this great wine, one of the original cults, and Bob had crafted great wines from that. But this is a property that could really, really we could take it to the next level. It's 21 acres, all 5 Bordeaux varietals, and really, how are we going to harness this property? And so, Jeff and I have worked closely. 12 was my first vintage, and I really think 12. I think we made a great wine. I was really happy with it.
Really happy.
But 13 was really where I think we took it to the next level, and 14 as well. I think we're still going that way. Vines, we have some older blocks there, but we have a great young block of C clone, same budwood from Hourglass Estate, that's now driving this wine. So
the reality is, it takes a little time
to
understand. I mean, obviously, I have some experience with the vineyard, but I'm not making the wines day in and day out. And Tony's making the calls on all the winemaking decisions. So he really needs to get his sort of fingers deeply into that vineyard and understand its nuances. It's 20 planted acres to all 5 red Bordeaux varietals. We have multiple clones of most of the varietals there. Mm-hmm. And there are very different profiles throughout the vineyard. There are probably at least 4 different soil series there. It's mostly a soil series called Cortina, which is a river wash, gravelly river wash soil. But the upper bench part of the Blueline estate is kind of these ashen, almost rhyolitic soils that have kind of sloughed off of the hillside. The hillside, that part of the Vaca mountain range, is made up of compressed volcanic ash. It got pushed basically up and created the mountains. And so over time, the hillside vegetation breaks down that bedrock. The wind and the rain and so forth slough that kind of decomposed volcanic ash back down to the hillside. So the top section of Blueline are these ashen soils that are kind of bone white. In the winter, when you walk around, they it's like you're walking on the wet part of the beach. In the summer, it's like powdery moon dust. So it's pretty crazy what the soils are like. And so those soils will vary from the soils that are down more in the flats, and some of the sections are more rocky, some of the sections more sandy. And so it just takes time to kind of learn all of those different blocks.
Yeah, and again, when I was started at Plum Check, I estimated, after looking back, at about 3 years to get my mind around it. I think we were able to start a little bit earlier just because I have more experience, and Jeff's had some experience sort of cheating and telling me what's great and what's not. But in reality, how all 5 varieties work together, where we're going to sniff out the quality, what area needed some help, what area it didn't. All these different things came to. I mean, it's a 20-acre piece of property, so and
you have everything from 22-year-old vines to very young vines from the replants. So all of that stuff throws interesting curveballs at
it. It does, and I love this property. I mean, if you guys can come there and see it, it's, to me, it really is what Napa Valley is all about. It's a small family-owned 20-acre piece of property. We make the wines there. You can watch the grapes being harvested and taste the wines, and the grapes never leave within 100 yards. From the front gate, it's probably a quarter of a mile. So if we're picking the old vine Franc, to haul it there is a quarter of a mile. But you can walk to that block. I often do in the morning. When they're picking, go out there and see what's going on, and it's a great wine. I mean, I love this block. I love this vineyard, and this is really the one that's for me been the most rewarding to work with. So.
Question from Fred: do the toast profiles?
No, we covered that one? Yeah, we did. Yeah.
Okay. I'm a little.
Fred
behind.
and I are on the same page.
You're dialed. So I'm always a little behind.
Do you see James's question? James Melendez asks, looking at the 375s, these are just for tasting and you don't produce. He didn't see 375 listed on the label.
Yeah, so 375s, the question was about 375s. Do we do these just for tastings or do we actually release these? We do predominantly 375s for this purpose of tastings. Yeah. We do leak a little bit of it out into the trade. The reason there was a question about you don't see the 375 delineation on the label itself. The reason for that is it should say 375 somewhere on the bottle. Yeah, so if it's on the bottle, you don't have to say it
BATF or TTB. Oh, James, don't get us in trouble now, right? They look at the bottle as the package. So if the bottle says, I think our 750 says 700 milliliters. Let me see, where is it?
Inside.
There it is, right there. See, so we don't have to put it on the label anywhere. That's how we get away with it.
So we use one label. It allows us to not have to print small batches of 375 labels.
Well, and the crazy thing is that the French don't want to work with us, so they put centiliters.
Yeah, right.
They really, or a milliliter, So I think they finally did it. They finally put 750 milliliters for us now, but in the past it was centiliters, so we'd have to put it on the label. So all the things we deal with. So
Further questions about Blueline Cab?
Ideal drinking window.
I think this is just getting going. I think this will make easily 7 to 10 years. Easy. Sure. We do a lot of research on the wines, and these wines are in a great position phonetically. These wines are going to make old bones. I mean, they will. This is a predominantly Cabernet, about 85% Cabernet, balance being Malbec and Petit Verdot. A little bit of Merlot. No Franc yet in this, because all the old vine Franc is bottled. As you guys all know, we make our own Franc as well. But what was the exciting thing in 13, we had our first crop of a new block of Franc that blew our minds. And 14. 14 was the first vintage of it. And so we're going to have a little Franc maybe in 15 going forward that we can eke into the Blueline Cabernet, just giving us another layer, which I'm really excited about. And we're going to probably plant some more as well. So Jeff didn't know that. I just told him that.
He doesn't have to do much convincing, because I'm a huge Cabernet Franc fan. So and Cab Franc does grow really well at Blueline. So I'm happy to plant a little bit more of that. So, I think that one of the things that's really important as you guys are talking to the trade or talking to your constituents and so forth, this concept of ageability. I think that we're still learning a lot about this modern style of winemaking, which is a higher pH style of winemaking that was sort of ushered in the early 90s. And I think we're now, and Tony, you can comment on this a little bit, but I think we're in a refinement phase in Napa Valley of how we are really dialing that in. And so the ageability question, to me, the more that I've studied this, the more wines that I've tasted, and Tony and I taste a lot of Napa Cabs going back into the 50s, and we talk to a lot. I grew up here. Tony's a kind of a historian, a student of the game, and as talking to the older winemakers all the time about techniques and what they were doing and tasting these wines. So we have a pretty wide breadth of stylistic winemaking through the last 50 years.
Yeah. And
one of the things that I think that we're kind of coming to the conclusion about is that ageability has everything to do with structure.
It does.
And the weave of tannin and the relationship of tannin to color and how that all integrates. So if we get the weave set really well in terms of the structural integrity of the wines, those wines are going to age a long, long time, even if the pHs are higher. So acidity has always been seen as sort of a driver of ageability, and it is part of the mix for sure. But I think actually structural integrity is the most important piece of this. And where does alcohol fit in that? If your alcohols are completely blown out and your wine's out of balance, that's going to be a problem. But if your alcohol is integrated because you have proper structure, and the alcohol is a part of the whole, and you don't taste it as something that is out of balance, you can actually have slightly higher alcohols and still have ageability at the same time.
I mean, I think with something, alcohol it's such a hot button issue right now. And I don't really know why. I mean, look where we are. People want to time and time again, comment on this. We are basically equal to the south of Italy or even south of Spain. And, we do have wines. Now, what I tell all of you out there, do we push the limits? I mean, I was part of that. Yeah, of course we did. But I think we also realize we're coming back to the middle, that we're not scared of acid anymore. We're not scared of, of having higher acidities, some freshness to the wines. But it's a learning curve, I mean, I also was a part of the 80s winemaking, which is a food wine era, where I started working at some wineries, and we would add 50-pound bags of acid just all day long. That's not right either. There's somewhere in the middle it has to go, and I feel because we are where we are in California, we'll always veer a little bit to the right from center because we are in a riper climate. Mm-hmm. We're a Mediterranean climate. I mean, that's why we all love living here. I mean, it's warm. I mean.
But we do also have, for those of you who haven't spent as much time here, the other thing that Napa has, which is pretty amazing, is the diurnal temperature.
It's everything. It's everything.
So our proximity to the coast and the marine influences, the fog that we get here, is hugely important. And this is maybe the only place in the wine growing world that I know of that has this big a dynamic. So by, let's say, 4 o'clock in the afternoon, at the heat apex of the day, it might be 100 degrees outside. And by 4 a.m., 12 hours later, that marine fog has worked its way into the valley, and it may be 50 degrees. So you could get a 50-degree temperature swing within a 12-hour cycle.
And
it's happening every day. Push, pull, push, pull, push, pull. And that has enormous impact on color development,
everything on color development. If you don't have cold nights, you're done.
Yeah.
So, well, I know everybody forgets too. We have the Pacific Ocean, whereas Bordeaux, almost in France, has the Atlantic Ocean. Completely different
Totally
oceans.
different.
How
rain
in
environments.
summertime? I mean, we all know that there rains nonstop in both Burgundy and Bordeaux all through the summer, where we get 1 inch of rain maybe from March or April 1st on. So that and the oceans are miserable though. Everybody knows, you go. If anybody ever been to Candlestick Park, remember those days? I mean, you're eating a chocolate malt with a wood spoon, 5 layers of clothing on, But and so I think that people forget that. I mean, in the morning in Napa Valley, you start in with a 2 vests and a sweater.
Yeah.
Most people's cars have 19 layers of clothing sitting in the back seat because you're always putting it on and off, on and off.
Yeah.
But wouldn't rather live in England. I think the grapes are pretty happy here, and I'm pretty happy here. So.
Yeah, so just to wrap up that comment about the aging arc, Blueline is relatively new to us, so we're still learning what the aging arc is. I can speak more conclusively to Hourglass Estate because we have more time with that. But I think that once we set the structural integrity at Blueline, and Blueline has been a more of a learning curve for us. When we acquired the property in 2006, I told my wife and friends and so forth it would take us 10 years to figure out that vineyard. And true to form, this is our 10th year, and we acquired it in the spring of 2006, so we're coming up on our 10th year. And I do think that we're actually now really starting to figure it out. And I think Tony has been able to apply the missing pieces. One of the things that Tony implemented when he first walked in the door was to do more sequential picking. So Bob was a little bit more of a fan of letting things hang for a longer period of time and picking one block on one day and so forth. Tony will now take that block and he'll cut it up into several picks. So we'll get an earlier pick, a mid pick, and a late pick. So you get a little bit more acidity, a little more red fruit out of the early picks, a little bit more plummy blueberry out of the mid picks, and then that dramatic black fruit out of the later picks, and then winding those together. So trying to create better structure and better layering as a result of that. And I think that 2013 really sees all of that stuff coming together with Blueline. And what I love about this wine is the structural weave. And then there's good expression of minerality. We now can actually taste the minerality again. We sort of pushed the boundaries of ripeness. By 2008, 2009, we were kind of hanging the needle.
I would say for me, a plumb to 8 was the year I realized I don't want to do this anymore.
Yeah,
it just wasn't fun anymore. I mean, it was, you're struggling with fermentations and so forth. It's not fun.
Listen, Tony is not going to apologize for that. I'm not going to apologize for that. Yeah. I don't know that anybody in Napa should ever apologize for pinning the needle out there, because you have to learn what the outer edges of the extremes are in order to know what the full range of possibilities are. Yeah. So we found ourselves, sort of out there, and we were like, these wines are dramatic, but they become very monochromatic. Yeah. And the alcohols are slipping up a little bit on us, and not that I care that much about it, but they were starting to maybe taste a little out of balance. And we were losing the red fruits. And actually this was the thing that bugged me the most. Both of our sites have incredible expression of minerality, and we were losing that.
The acidity too.
So as you build more phenolic mass, then all of a sudden you're masking the expression of minerality. So then when we pull that phenolic mass back, now all of a sudden the vibrancy of minerality, which is an important energy source, now starts to come back to life again. And so now you've got rich wines that are vibrant, and that's a hard thing to get.
Yeah.
And that's kind of the essence of what we're trying to do with our winemaking program, is to have this sort of tensional balance between richness and vibrancy and energy. So we need a little acidity, we need a little minerality, we need to back off on the phenolic mass a little bit to sort of get there.
Well, I think, alcohol became such a talking point, such a hot button issue, when reality was acidity. That's what everybody needs to realize, is that, no one wanted that acid anymore. Everybody wanted to have a pH of 4, do all these different things. The wine tasted flabby. You can have a balanced wine with a high alcohol, it tastes great, as long as there's acidity and there's some freshness to it. Yeah. Now so when that is what I've always sort of said to people, like, no. And I have colleagues that don't add acid to anything. And I'm like, no, I still do add some acid, but I try to do it incrementally and before we ferment. People forget fermentation is the most violent, most aggressive act in all of nature. So as long as you do stuff before then, you're setting the wine after that. My goal is, after the wine has been fermented and it goes to barrels, we're just sort of becoming a caretaker of the wine. So if we do add a little bit of acid beforehand, or if the wine, Hourglass Estate, which we'll get to next, that's just natural acidity. That just comes off the vine like that. I don't know why.
And that's always been that way.
That's what you said, and
Yeah.
it's true. I never touch it. It just comes in. We add some yeast, and we go off of the races. We go.
Bob never acidulated the Hourglass Estate. It's just that site, for whatever reason. But I also, Tony, I also really like the fact that you're doing more sequential picking now. So we are picking some sections.
Yeah, it's increasing the
earlier.
spice rack.
It's allowing and the
the
brightness of some of that red fruit now is
a kaleidoscope of flavors, Jeff. So that's
I can't say it any better than that.
So,
all right, questions?
Have fun.
You guys have covered a lot of these. One of them from Giselle says, in keeping with a wine's ability to age well, would you agree that a wine needs to be balanced to develop and improve over time?
Yeah.
Yes.
So hold on, let's reiterate the question.
Oh, sorry.
So the question
Yes.
was relevant to the aging arc relative to balance. And so there's a lot that goes into aging, and I think we talked a little bit about our thoughts about the importance of structure. That's tannin and color. That relationship, tannin and color, really, really critical, because if we can get those tannins bound to color and we can get them short, the weave, they pack together. So if we can get the tighter weave of the tannins achieved by stopping polymerization, so the color bonds to the tannin and it stops the polymerization process, so we get a tighter weave. That's a really critical piece of ageability. The presence of acid, and then the overall balance. And this is something that I think is, and this speaks right to the question, the importance of overall balance. So I think overall balance is something that you can't necessarily run through a spectrometer or a gas chromatograph and figure out what that is. That's a perception thing. You have to taste that. You have to smell it. You have to feel it on your palate. And so this is where the art of blending, the art of making wine merges with the science of making wine. And so I think you perceive balance.
Yeah, again, I always.
But you can't measure it necessarily.
No, well, I think all of what all of you tasters out there is what's balanced to you is not necessarily balanced to me.
True that.
And I drink different things than you all drink out there. You probably all drink better than I drink, so that's you lucky guys out there. So, but I would say that my goal, and then blending with Jeff and so forth, is I love to look for perceived sweetness. I know it sounds funny, but I think when we've done it right and we've balanced the wine right, you get almost a sweetness, a saccharosity to the wine.
It's fruit. It's a tannin sweetness.
It's a tannin sweetness.
It's not a sugar.
It's not a sugar sweetness. None of these. Sorry, the HG3 is filtered, but these wines are not filtered, so we can't leave sugar in them. I don't like the filter, so that would be a mess. And so to get there, the wines have to be dry. But if you can maintain the tannin structure, getting the balance right, the wines almost give you a sensibility of being sweet. But I think once you've had a wine that is sweet, you'll understand that the weight is completely different on the palate. But it's a sensation of like, whoa, that's really, really well made. So
the short answer is yes, balance matters a lot, I think, to ageability.
It does.
What about the relationship between richness and precision? You guys have touched on that a little bit, but there's some kind of questions and comments.
So do you want us to comment on that subject, or are there specific questions to that point?
Just kind of why.
Do you want me to
we've gotten a lot of wows, rich but so precise. Why?
So the question was the importance of richness and precision. What does that mean relative to us? And I think it speaks to the core of what we're trying to do.
That's what we're trying to do, and that's everything. You hear so many people talk about so many different things that's important to them. I have the world's best barrels, this or that. First and foremost, you need great vineyards that can give you, a good tannin and good color. Color is really what we've found to be the quality parameter for a great vineyard. Not saying dark, but there's color in the grapes. Weaker sites won't give you that. And so what we're doing when we're macerating and we're trying to get the wine, I spend an inordinate amount of time during the harvest monitoring maceration. So when we're fermenting, because that's everything. If you get it wrong there, all you're trying to do is fix the problem for the next 18 to 20 months. If you get it right, you're babysitting. And that's really what I want to do. But I mean, it sounds funny, but that 3 or 4 weeks when we're fermenting, I'm there 12, 14 hours a day, pumping over at 9 p.m. at 9, coming in at 2 a.m. and pressing because of the numbers and the wines taste good. Sugar gets in the way sometimes. That's why we put sugar in coffee. Coffee's bitter, coffee's tannic, so you put sugar in to hide that. So sometimes sugar can get in the way of maceration because you're like, oh, it tastes great. But then when you get to dryness, you're like, oh my God, it's tannic. So the precision of that, of getting it right, is very, very hard. And we don't always succeed, but in a year like 13, we succeeded across the board. That's kind of why I say 13 to me is the best vintage I've ever seen, because the stuffing in the grapes just allowed us to do this. It was almost, Jeff didn't need me this vintage. This is the first time I'm telling him this, So
I actually would maybe disagree with that, but
that's so when
for
I
a lot
say
of reasons,
richness and precision, the precision allows the wine to be rich. No one likes to know how sausage is made. That's a little boring. But however, we spend an inordinate amount of money and time trying to get our macerations and our fermentations correct. And I think that's the biggest mistake in the wine business in general. People don't pay enough attention to that.
Well, this is one of the reasons why Tony and I decided to work together, is that we both have an understanding that Napa has been on this sort of stylistic learning curve. We've both ridden the entire pendulum swing. And what we wanted to do is we wanted to try to find the holy grail moments for our specific vineyards. And so because we've been on that spectrum, we kind of knew where we wanted to land when everything sort of hit perfectly. And it's, as Tony said, a little right of center. So these wines are still modern wines. They're still made in a modern Napa Valley style. They're still slightly higher pH to the wines that were made in the 50s, 60s, 70s. But we didn't want these wines to be blown out. We didn't want them to be monochromatic. Mm-hmm. We wanted them to have vibrancy, to be a counterweight and a tensional edge to richness. So how do we get there? So Tony and I talked about this for months before we decided to start working together. And I had become sort of theoretically fascinated with phenolics and their role to play in trying to figure this whole equation out of getting to the Holy Grail. Tony is one of the masters of working with phenolics. He's on the very cutting edge of some really, really cool science. And I was really fascinated with his level of understanding and his practitioner's level of understanding relative to understanding what phenolics are, how they work together, and we won't bore you with all the details, but it comes down to kind of this color-tannin relationship.
Yeah, the precision of that.
So we get that right.
So
that's the precision.
That's precision, and that in turn gives you the richness. These wines in front of you, especially the Blueline and the Hourglass Estate, are incredibly tannic if they were taken by themselves. But because there's so much color in them, the wines taste less tannic than they are. That's the trick. It tricks your palate. It's a game. And
the structural weave.
We need to move to the estate. We've been told. So somebody's in my ear. So
we have good handlers.
But I think that's a good segue, because I think Jeff says these perfect moments. I really think the Hourglass Estate to me is one of those perfect moment wines. I love this wine. From the minute it went to barrels, I just was so proud of it. And I think this is sort of a culmination of what Jeff and I are trying to do with precise macerations, picking at the perfect moment, not overripe but not underripe. Having a vineyard just give to you perfect grapes, and you just macerate it. You get it to barrels. You rack it a couple times. You put it in a bottle without filtration. Simple as that. There's really nothing more to it than that. And 22-year-old C clone, very special clone that I love. I've done a lot of research on it, and I just love this wine. I mean, Jeff will tell you this wine is a culmination of a lot of mistakes. So 20 years ago.
Yeah,
so.
yeah.
All the right mistakes.
All the right mistakes. Sometimes you get lucky. And my dad bought this property in 1976. Didn't know what he had bought. And he originally planted it to Zinfandel in the late 70s, and we would just contract the fruit to other people. And then Dad passed away in 1990. I took over the management of the vineyard for my mom, and she wanted to sell the property when we got hit with phylloxera the next year. And I talked her out of that, talked her into planting Cabernet. We did everything wrong that you could possibly do, and it turned out great. It turned out right. And that little vineyard site, it takes its name from the fact that Napa Valley is more or less shaped like an hourglass. And that hillside vineyard defines the pinch, or the narrow crossing, of the valley. And there is a thermal dynamic there that I think is central to why that vineyard is pretty magical. And so as the constriction of the two mountain ranges, the Mayacamas and the Vaca, come together, you get Calistoga that heats up and it pulls that cool bay air north, and you get a bottleneck effect in the late afternoon, right at the heat apex of the day. So it's cooling that site down. And that cooling effect keeps the acids a little bit higher. It keeps the phenolic development, keeps the color high, but it also keeps our alcohols or sugars a little bit lower. So we can slow down the front end of the ripening cycle and wait for the back end to catch up. So it has this kind of self-balancing mechanism.
Yeah, and again, it comes back to being in a perfect spot of the valley. That's part of terroir is partly that. Why is Mouton special? Because it's a perfect spot, and this vineyard's in a great spot. Like Jeff said, it's just warm enough to get the Cabernet nice and ripe. It's just cold enough to maintain, berry integrity, so it doesn't raisin, and we get the best of both worlds. It's a very special site, and the more I work with it, the more I love it. I mean, you can walk this vineyard and find balls of obsidian. It's just so cool. It's just, my daughter thinks she thinks she's found diamonds and stuff. She's like, what I found? I'm like, it's obsidian, sweetheart. But she's at 10, so she's really excited about it. So I don't want to just bust her bubble yet. But she thinks it's worth a lot. I'm like, it's just glass. But, so she's excited. But the vineyard's amazing. And so this was in barrels for 22 months, bottled, unfiltered, and just now coming out of this. I love this one at the very beginning.
It's showing really, or at least our samples are showing really well tonight. One thing I would recommend you guys do is to taste this maybe over the next day or two.
Yeah, I mean, you guys have half bottles, so I think they're on a little bit more of a maturity curve than the 750s would be. But I really think that both the Blueline to me is a beguiling monster. It just changes nonstop, and I think from when you had it at the beginning to now, that's all the varietals, 3 varietals working together, just sort of pushing and pulling, trying to come together. I mean, most 13s aren't released till next year. We tend to release a little earlier, so you guys are sort of seeing that happen in the glass, whereas one varietal in the estate, one clone, one block, well, 2 blocks, but I mean, put together pretty early, you're sort of seeing the difference. This is the rambunctious teenager. This one's already sort of suave. This person wears a tie to high school. This one doesn't. So.
But they'll both take oxygen really, really well. So the more you give them a good slosh around and need that oxygen in there, you'll find that you'll get new layers of aromatics, and you'll find that you get different textural layers and so forth as the wine opens up with more oxygen. And again, that's actually another for someone had asked a question earlier about the aging arc and ageability and so forth. One of the things that'll give you a little glimpse of the wine's ability to age is how, can you pull a cork on it and taste it 24, 48 hours later and have that wine still showing itself and together, because that'll give you a sense, again, of the structural weave of that wine and how well it's compacted and put together. So these wines are, I'll open a bottle, drink half of it, 48 hours later, oh yeah, I forgot I had this bottle, and it'll be even better.
I always say that, a wine's great when the best glass is the last glass that you guys order. It's not front end loaded. You're enjoying it the whole night, and the last glass, God, this wine got better all night. Yeah. That's when I know I've done my job and made a good job, made a good wine. So,
questions?
I think we need to kind of reiterate sort of the vineyard makeup. Obviously, have a question about whether or not this is always 100% Cabernet Sauvignon.
Hourglass Estate is always 100% Cabernet Sauvignon, and it's always 100% Hourglass Estate. So the Hourglass Estate is a little teeny 4-acre hillside vineyard just north of the town of St. Helena. So it's the same grapes from the same site every year. Blueline will differ a little bit.
Yeah, it can. Every year different, because if you have all the varietals there with Cabernet Franc coming online, it's really, like perfect example, 12 and 13 was a Petit Verdot vintage, 14 was a Malbec vintage. So there's going to be more Malbec in the 14 than there was in the 13. Don't know why that is, just is. I mean, 14's a great, maybe because it's hotter, maybe the variety likes more heat, because 14 is a little warmer, and so is 15 and 13. I can't tell you guys why, but the 15 Malbec is mind-bogglingly good. I mean, it's, we do bottle a little bit of Malbec here off the property, and it's just always been a fun variety. I mean, you can't really pigeonhole what it is, though. It's really, it's like Zinfandel some days. It's just, but it's, I call it the natural fining agent, because, some people use egg whites to fine a wine. We use Malbec because it's got a ton of color, but it's very soft. So you can use it as if you have a monstrous lot of Cabernet. Again, it's going back to blending. I try to do everything in the winery naturally. I don't want to have to add chemicals like, isinglass or hydrochlor, which is gelatin. I'd rather be able to, have a lot of wine that's softer and blend back. And it's really an art of blending. So you can craft these wines very naturally, but still get to where you want that balance that we were talking about, the acidity that we're talking about. So when we're picking in different lots, Jeff and I'll say, hey, I might pick this one a little riper or a little less ripe. I might not extract it as heavily. I might want to make it softer and suppler. Why? Well, I have a couple tanks that are really tannic, so I'm going to blend naturally back into that. It's what Bordeaux has been doing for 100 years, making these estate wines. And it's really what I think we lack sometimes in Napa Valley, that foresight of doing. Because reality is there's not a lot of properties the same size as some of these Bordeaux chateaus. I mean, we're very much akin to the right bank, like Pomerol and Saint-Emilion, about 2,000, 3,000 case properties. People forget, Latour is 20,000, 30,000 cases size, and that's a huge piece of property. So.
Yeah. I think also, so the Blueline estate is going to be single vineyard as well. It's just a larger vineyard, and we have more pieces, more things to choose from. And one of the things I think is quite amazing about Tony's winemaking is that he will assess each one of these wines as he's making them and make decisions on the fly about what he needs from the vineyard that he hasn't picked yet to marry with what he's already brought in. So it's kind of a cool thing at Blueline to be able to have more pieces of the puzzle to play with, and then a winemaker who's got the on-the-fly expertise to say, you know what, this lot that I just brought in and fermented has a very strong tannic spine to it, and I need to go out and maybe pull a little Malbec now, a little earlier, so that I can marry with that and use that as a fining agent, a blending agent.
And then speaking of the Malbec, question about that. Blueline Malbec is stunning, says Isaac. Will you be bottling any 2013 Blueline Malbec this year?
Oh yeah.
So Isaac made a comment about the Blueline Malbec program that we have. It's a small program. We do maybe 100 cases of the Malbec. It's kind of a fun thing that we do for our mailing list. But yes, we do. It's now part of our normal rotation. So we did make a 13 Malbec.
I think we tasted it in the spring.
Did we?
We hear this. We only make 100 cases, so it's not one of our drivers, but definitely something to be looking out for.
You know what? We didn't. I don't think we did a spring tasting this year, so we may not have done a 13 Malbec. And
it's great. Again, it's just
we'll do that. We'll invite you guys back for that one.
Yeah, absolutely. We're definitely going to bottle a 14 though, so just in case, just so you know.
Yeah. So the Malbec, beyond being a great blending agent for us, what we found is we planted it in the most sandy of the soils. And for whatever reason, it kind of goes down. Malbec's going to give you a lot of black fruit because it's just loaded with color. But this Malbec also gives you a lot of red fruit to go on.
It does. It's almost like Zinfandel. I always think it reminds me of Zinfandel, like raspberries.
Raspberry, strawberry.
You say Kool-Aid. You like think Kool-Aid and stuff like that. It's true. It's like it was fruit punch.
And it's just like searing minerality. It's like buzzing on your back mid palate. It's a crazy wine. And so we decided. Cool, you got this richness, but you've got this like super souped up minerality. And the phenolic mass is not so great on it. It's interesting because it doesn't have quite as much mouthfeel or shoulders as the Cab would or Merlot.
No, it's soft. I mean, it's a plush. It's like it's so mind-boggling. It looks as dark as Petit Syrah, but it's soft. It's like Merlot. It's
less tannin, more color.
Less tannin, but the ratios are great, and the ratios are off the charts. I mean, we have certain numbers that I like to look for. I know this is again more science than it is, but it is art as well. And these numbers are usually off the charts with Malbec. They just blow your mind.
And we probably have time for one last question. I think this one's perfect for you guys. Let's see if we can keep it to 3 minutes. But basically, a comment that you two talk more about color than most winemakers. What's that about?
So the question is that we have a fascination or a fixation with color, and we talk about it maybe more so than some other winemakers. There are a couple other winemakers who we know that that treat it very seriously. But Tony, your fixation with color?
It sounds funny. I mean, I drink a lot of Burgundy, so once you drink Pinot Noir and Nebbiolo wines, you don't tend to stress out as much about color. But we make Cabernet, and that's what people forget. I'm not trying to make Cabernet look like Nebbiolo. I'm not trying to make Cabernet look like Pinot Noir. Cabernet has color in it. And